trong những cái đơn vị cung cấp quản trị nguồn vốn có năng lực tốt nhất hiện tại. Thì đó là một cái giới thiệu sơ cho các anh chị về cái vấn đề dịch vụ của Deloitte về vấn đề quản lý nguồn vốn. Thì các anh chị nhìn ở cái bottom của screen, các anh chị sẽ thấy là có một cái mã web. Nếu mà các anh chị cần thêm cái thông tin, anh chị sẽ có thể nhìn dưới đây. Rồi, thì trước khi đi vào chi tiết thì nội dung của cái hội thảo hôm nay sẽ gồm có 3 phần. Phần đầu tiên tôi sẽ nói sơ về cái vấn đề môi trường và cái bối cảnh quản lý nguồn vốn hiện tại ở Việt Nam nó như thế nào. Phần thứ hai thì ông Benny sẽ chia sẻ về làm sao mà quản lý nguồn vốn một cách hiệu quả và thường thường các doanh nghiệp hay làm cái gì. Phần thứ ba, ông François sẽ chia sẻ với các anh chị về các ứng dụng công nghệ để sử dụng quản lý nguồn vốn làm sao cho nó hiệu quả. Như các anh chị đã nhìn ở đây thì theo cái khảo sát gần đây của VCCI và World Bank, đặc biệt là khi chúng ta đang nói về cái vấn đề mà Covid-19 thì nó ảnh hưởng tới cái doanh nghiệp như thế nào, thì các anh chị chắc chắn là cũng đã biết rồi đúng không? Hiện tại là Hồ Chí Minh đang bị lockdown, bây giờ Hà Nội cũng như có rất nhiều các tỉnh thành, thì là những cái gì là những cái mà thường thường các doanh nghiệp mà đau đầu nhất và cảm thấy khó khăn nhất. Thì cái survey này trên 10.000 doanh nghiệp thì các anh chị cũng nhìn thấy là khi mà hỏi là có bị ảnh hưởng hay không thì chắc chắn là trên 87,2% của doanh nghiệp đều nói rằng chúng tôi bị ảnh hưởng rất nhiều. Thì trong số đó thì đương nhiên sẽ có một số doanh nghiệp rất nhỏ, 2% doanh nghiệp kêu là nó có ảnh hưởng cực. Thì chẳng hạn như những doanh nghiệp mà chúng ta có thể nói là những doanh nghiệp có thể là chuyên về thiết bị y tế, những doanh nghiệp về logistics, hay là những doanh nghiệp mà chuyên về các cái vấn đề mà tiêu dùng online, thì những doanh nghiệp đó là thường là họ sẽ được lợi ở trong cái Covid. Đa số doanh nghiệp còn lại đều bị ảnh hưởng. Khi chúng tôi hỏi khi mà VCCI và World Bank làm cái khảo sát thì hỏi thêm về cái vấn đề vậy thường là ảnh hưởng cái gì là nhiều nhất mà quan trọng nhất, thì các anh chị cũng nhìn thấy ở đây. Đa số là cái vấn đề đầu tiên là khi mà chúng ta bị giãn cách xã hội thì cái điều đầu tiên chuyện gì xảy ra là cái chuyện gần khách hàng. Gần khách hàng chắc chắn là chúng ta sẽ không có tiếp cận thêm một truyền thống nữa, không thể làm việc face to face đối diện nữa. Cái vấn đề tiếp cận. Vấn đề thứ hai là cái vấn đề chúng ta nói là cái gì? Vấn đề là chắc chắn là đứt gãy chuỗi cung ứng, đúng không? Về vấn đề mà coi như là hàng hóa không lưu thông được, vấn đề nguyên vật liệu đầu vào. Và một trong những cái đề quan trọng nhất mà hơn phân nửa doanh nghiệp nói là cái vấn đề các anh chị thấy ở đây là vấn đề dòng tiền. Ok, là dòng tiền lúc nào cũng có vấn đề là rất nhiều cái doanh nghiệp đã thiếu dòng tiền và không thể hoạt động được. Cái vấn đề giãn cách xã hội, đó là cái toàn cảnh sơ lược về bối cảnh của Việt Nam. Rồi, vậy thì thường có những cái chuyện gì đang xảy ra nhiều nhất? Ok, thì chúng tôi sẽ tóm lược một vài cái điểm chính chia sẻ với các anh chị. Cái này không phải là tất cả những cái vấn đề xảy ra, nhưng mà nó là những cái common, những cái vấn đề mà thường xảy ra nhiều nhất. Thì ở đây các anh chị có nhìn thấy đầu tiên chúng ta có thể nói về thanh khoản. Rất nhiều các công ty đang bị cái vấn đề về thanh khoản, thiếu những cái dự báo về cái vấn đề dòng tiền của mình như thế nào. Thường đa số cũng không có những cái công cụ để theo dõi được cái nguồn vốn của mình, thì nó sẽ xảy ra những cái vấn đề thanh khoản. Tôi đã từng thấy một số doanh nghiệp là làm ăn rất tốt, bán rất được, nhưng mà cái vấn đề là thanh khoản không có. Tiền thì chưa về nhưng mà chi phí thì đều phải thanh toán. Đó, cái vấn đề đó thanh khoản là một trong những vấn đề đầu tiên. Vấn đề thứ hai là cái vấn đề và chúng ta nói là mối quan hệ với ngân hàng. Thì có một số doanh nghiệp, đặc biệt là những doanh nghiệp có rất nhiều tiền cũng rất là đau đầu. Bây giờ tôi có rất là nhiều tiền rồi, nhưng mà bây giờ tôi sẽ phân bố cái tiền của tôi cho những cái ngân hàng nào, bao nhiêu cho ngân hàng cấp 1, bao nhiêu cho ngân hàng cấp 2, bao nhiêu cho ngân hàng cấp 3, và chúng tôi nên có bao nhiêu tài khoản là đủ. Chẳng hạn nhiều tài khoản quá cũng không tốt, ít tài khoản có cũng tốt, nhưng mà bao nhiêu là đủ. Những câu hỏi đó thì thường là các doanh nghiệp không có những cái câu trả lời nhất định. Thì đương nhiên ngoài ra là có những cái những cái doanh nghiệp thì là thiếu tiền. Thì thiếu tiền thì khi làm tôi đã có cái chiến lược chưa, tôi đã có những cái ngân hàng mà chúng tôi có thể partnership khi mà cái vấn đề mà thiếu tiền thì tôi có thể nói chuyện với ai như thế nào, thì cái đó nó cũng chưa rõ ràng. Cái điểm thứ ba chúng ta nói tới là tài trợ vốn. Thì chẳng hạn đặc biệt during cái tình hình mà Covid như thế này thì vấn đề tài trợ vốn thì nó như thế nào. Chẳng hạn khi mà chúng tôi thiếu vốn thì cái cơ chế tiếp theo là như thế nào, là vay nội bộ, vay ở ngân hàng. Chúng tôi nên đưa ra trái phiếu. Gần đây thì các anh chị cũng thấy là rất nhiều doanh nghiệp Việt Nam bắt đầu là coi như là cung cấp trái phiếu ra ngoài, hoặc là ok là vốn sở hữu, và cách quản lý dòng tiền như thế nào thì nó cũng chưa rõ ràng. Cái điểm tiếp theo là cái giám sát trạng thái dòng tiền. Ở đây Ivan cũng làm việc với một số cái doanh nghiệp lớn và cũng một số doanh nghiệp tư nhân, thì thường thường cái vấn đề mà giám sát dòng tiền nó cũng chưa có rõ ràng. Đa số thì chúng ta vẫn hay làm theo cái vấn đề là tiền mặt, coi như là tiền vào và tiền ra như thế nào, nhưng mà vấn đề mà để dự báo là khi nào nó vào khi nào nó ra thì nó rất là khó. Chỉ thấy khi tiền vào thì mình ghi nó vào, khi tiền ra thì là mình coi cái bank account nó như thế nào. Thì cái vấn đề mà giám sát trạng thái dòng tiền nó rất yếu, đặc biệt là những cái doanh nghiệp lớn và có rất nhiều cái công ty con khác nhau. Thì các anh chị cũng thấy là đa số chúng ta hay bị vấn đề là có thể một công ty con thiếu tiền thì phải đi vay ngân hàng, trong khi một số công ty con khác lại có nhiều tiền nhưng mà dòng tiền không thể giống như là lưu chuyển một cách nó hiệu quả nhất. Làm sao mà tôi chuyển từ tiền từ một cái khối này qua khối kia như thế nào, thì cái chuyện đó nó cũng chưa rõ ràng. Thì thường thường những cái vấn đề về hướng dẫn, vấn đề mà quản lý dòng tiền tập trung, đa số nó vẫn còn thiếu. Vấn đề tiếp theo chúng ta nói tới là chuyển đổi số và an ninh mạng, thì chúng ta cũng kêu là cái gì cũng phải cần có cái công cụ. Thì quản lý nguồn vốn hiệu quả cũng vậy, nhất là những doanh nghiệp càng ngày càng lớn thì không thể nào mà tiếp tục quản lý thủ công trên vấn đề Excel, thì chúng ta phải chắc chắn phải sử dụng những cái công cụ đó. Và khi mà chúng ta sử dụng những cái công cụ thì là một trong những cái điểm chúng ta cũng phải để ý là về cái rủi ro an ninh mạng nó như thế nào đó. Và các anh chị cũng biết là gần đây là cái vấn đề mà mối lo an ninh mạng tấn công thì nó rất nhiều, nó đã xảy ra, và Việt Nam là một trong những nước bị tấn công an ninh mạng nhiều nhất, vì cái cơ sở hạ tầng cũng như là vì cái kiến trúc và cái hệ thống công nghệ thông tin của chúng ta chưa có đủ tốt để ngăn những cuộc tấn công an ninh mạng. Và cái vấn đề cuối cùng là cái vấn đề tất cả các anh chị, đặc biệt là các anh chị mà đang run các bộ phận tài chính kế toán, thì vấn đề chúng ta luôn luôn nói tới về quản lý rủi ro. Và khi quản lý rủi ro ở đây là những rủi ro nào, đặc biệt về nguồn vốn tài chính mà chúng ta hay nói tới, thì chúng ta thường thường nói về rủi ro tỷ giá, rủi ro về lãi suất, những cái rủi ro về dòng tiền nó đi như thế nào. Thì thường thường những cái vấn đề đó là chúng ta chưa có rõ ràng. Thì với một số cái doanh nghiệp mà Ivan đã làm ở Việt Nam cũng như cái doanh nghiệp nói chung, thì Ivan thấy rằng về cái góc độ tổng thể, khi mà nói về quản lý nguồn vốn thì đa số các doanh nghiệp Việt Nam về cái góc độ mà chúng ta nói năng lực về kế toán thì rất tốt, nhưng mà khi mà nói về cái năng lực mà quản lý nguồn vốn hay tài chính thì nó rất là yếu, hoặc là có rất nhiều doanh nghiệp cũng chưa biết là ok quản lý nguồn vốn là nó như thế nào, là cái bộ phận Treasury này nó như thế nào, nó báo cáo cho ai, nó làm cái gì. Thì ngay cả những cái căn bản đó thì một số doanh nghiệp chúng ta vẫn còn thiếu. Thì cái vấn đề mà chúng ta về vấn đề là làm sao theo dõi ngân sách, làm sao giám sát dòng tiền, làm sao di chuyển dòng tiền của các nơi, làm sao mà khi mà chúng ta cần vốn chúng ta vay ở đâu, làm sao mà chúng ta bỏ tiền vào những cái ngân hàng nào, cấp 1, cấp 2, cấp 3 cho hợp lý. Thì những cái đó Ivan thấy là đa số ở cái năng lực Việt Nam, trừ những cái doanh nghiệp mà đã trưởng thành, còn đa số vẫn đang bị cái vấn đề đó. Thì tiếp theo phần 2 thì Ivan sẽ nhường lời cho ông Benny sẽ đi vào chi tiết hơn là cái vấn đề người ta quản lý nguồn vốn như thế nào và làm như thế nào. Và trước hết thì chúng tôi sẽ có một cái poll question. Hằng, please go ahead. Thì các anh chị sẽ thấy đây là một cái poll question, một cái câu hỏi. Thì các anh chị nhìn vào câu hỏi và chọn cái câu trả lời của mình, sau đó chúng ta sẽ tiếp tục.
Thank you, Ivan. Câu hỏi này liên quan đến cái khó khăn hiện tại đối với các doanh nghiệp của anh chị. Thì đối với hoạt động nguồn vốn, hiện tại đâu là khó khăn lớn nhất mà anh chị thấy, hoặc là mình thiếu các nhân lực chuyên môn và nhân lực chuyên trách cho hoạt động nguồn vốn, hoặc là mình thiếu các cái chính sách và các hướng dẫn thực hiện, hoặc là mình thiếu các cái công nghệ của công cụ, hoặc là tất cả các cái khó khăn nói trên. Mình sẽ chờ 1-2 phút để các anh chị hoàn thành cái poll này ha. Team hỗ trợ khi nào mình có câu trả lời hoặc là mình có số lượng người tham gia cái câu hỏi poll này tương đối, chắc là mình sẽ pop up với câu trả lời luôn ạ. Vâng, đây là đáp án của mình. Thì phần lớn chúng ta có 66% các anh chị tham dự cái buổi webinar hôm nay tham gia vào cái poll này. Mình thấy là 56% tất cả các cái công ty hiện tại tham gia vào webinar, mình thấy là mình có khó khăn ở tất cả các lĩnh vực nói trên, từ con người cho đến chính sách, đến cơ chế và đến công nghệ hỗ trợ. Trong đó thì các cái khó khăn liên quan đến con người và khó khăn liên quan đến chính sách thì có vẻ ít hơn một chút, là mình có khoảng tầm 9-10% mình có các cái khó khăn này. Vâng, cảm ơn các anh chị rất là nhiều đã tham gia vào cái poll này. Và sau đây thì tôi xin giới thiệu ông Benny Cole, là Phó Tổng Giám đốc Dịch vụ Tư vấn Quản lý Nguồn vốn Toàn cầu tại Deloitte Singapore, sẽ chia sẻ với chúng ta các nội dung chuyên sâu về quản trị nguồn vốn cũng như là xu hướng phát triển ở các quốc gia. Ông Benny thì có hơn 25 năm kinh nghiệm quản lý nguồn vốn toàn cầu, và trước khi gia nhập Deloitte, ông đã từng giữ chức vụ Giám đốc Quản lý Nguồn vốn tại Temasek, là một cái công ty đầu tư của chính phủ Singapore. Và trước đó thì ông cũng làm tại tập đoàn General Electric với nhiều vai trò về quản trị nguồn vốn khác nhau. Và sau đây tôi xin mời ông Benny. Over to Benny. Over to Benny, please.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for joining this webinar. And it is an honor and a privilege for us to be here speaking with all of you industry business leaders today. As Ivan has talked about some of the challenges that's actually facing Vietnamese companies, actually this is not unique to Vietnam, right? With COVID-19, a lot of companies in all the different countries are actually affected, be it from a supply chain disruption standpoint or working from home arrangement. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few more slides. When we talk about treasury, the word treasury means a lot of things to different people. If I were to talk to a startup company, treasury is COO, the Chief Operating Officer, because the company is too small. He or she will probably have to do almost everything. And for some companies, local companies, when we talk about treasury, they'll say, oh, that's my accounting department, because we have someone doing accounts payable, someone doing bank reconciliation, someone doing payables, right? Receivables management. And then if we were to talk to a multinational company, they say, oh, wow, we have a 200 people global centralized treasury. So from an organizational standpoint, treasury means different things to different organizations, given the maturity. But having said all that, the roles that treasury play, whether is it accounting department or is it the COO or is it a formalized treasury, the roles are actually very much the same. And when we talk to clients about treasury, we normally talk about these 5 things, which I'm going to share with you a little bit this morning. And the first one is again about the organization, right? Who, regardless of who is playing the role, who are the people that are actually doing this? Do they have the correct competency? And do we actually have a robust, clear, even simple governance process behind some of these processes? And then the second thing we talk about when we talk about treasury is what does the treasury role or work entails, right? I think one of the basic building block of a treasury role is actually managing bank relationship, managing borrowings, managing excess cash investment, managing bank account opening, closing, getting daily reports from the banks, and overall negotiating with the bank, right, for better rates, for better services for your organization. So there is someone in your company right now that's actually playing this role. And the second basic function is around cash management. It can be as basic as getting a daily cash position report, making sure that all the cash is actually in the correct place and reconciling it. And it could be as complex for some organization, right, that is actually managing payments on behalf of for the whole group. So cash management also is actually a big word, but as Ivan said, I think we'll talk a little bit more about liquidity management. What does it take to be successful in that? Market risk management, that is also very critical, a part of what we call Treasury role and responsibility. As company expand and have operation overseas or have customer overseas, we all have to deal with foreign exchange, right? If we're receiving US dollars, what's the value of the US dollars to my local currency? That will also affect earnings. And how do I manage that? If I have if we have syndicated loan borrowing in euros or in US dollars, and when it comes to final principal payment, I actually have to convert Vietnamese dong into US dollars or euros to pay that loan. And at that point in time, the value of that loan could be more or less, right, depending on how foreign exchange is moving. And there is also a risk that we need to manage. So the Treasury team in our world manages cash, liquidity, bank relationship, market risk. And that's the basic ingredient of what we call a Treasury role or Treasury function. Number 5, Francois will talk a little bit more about technology. We are seeing technology being a very hot topic right now for a few reasons. Because of COVID, everyone is working from home. And like it or not, we all have to try to leverage technology. And the fact that we're presenting before you today online using a webinar, I would say 3 to 4 years ago, this is not even something as consultant we will do. We will actually fly there to meet with you in person in a ballroom to give you a presentation. The fact that we're having a Zoom meeting right now, it shows that we are actually adopting technology and you're actually very comfortable with technology. And how do we leverage that concept of technology into our finance operation, into our treasury operation, and in a very secure way? This is where Francois will spend more time to talk about what is actually possible. Ivan talked about COVID-19, how it impacts Vietnam. Singapore was actually very affected. One of the first countries in the world, they were affected. And now, till today, our country is still very much default working from home after 1.5 years. And what are the hot topics that came out of it over the last 1.5 years when we talked to CFOs and finance managers, right? I think the key issue that people had to deal with at that point in time was liquidity. Do I have enough cash? Should COVID-19 really disrupt business? Do I have enough cash and liquidity to pay my salary, my staff, to pay supplier, to keep the lights on, to pay my rent? So liquidity was a very, very hot topic, I would say, for Singapore, 12 months ago. And do we make sure that the bank continue to honor the credit line that they give us and not to cut the line suddenly because business is bad, right, for us? So liquidity has been the top of mind for many, many companies. And then as we work from home, then the operational part comes in a lot more. How do I make payments now that all my finance staff is actually at home? How do I authorize payments? How do I manage cash? How do I manage authorization on paper? And I know that this is something that most of you business leaders in Vietnam are actually thinking and dealing with today, right? As a country is making sure that people are staying safe by working from home. We also talk about confidential document management. If I have my staff at home with a printer and having to print documents out for checking, for endorsing, and if there's any error, what does the staff do with the paper? These are actually confidential information. If we are all working in the office, we actually have shredders and making sure that people are actually disposing of those documents in the correct place. By working from home, how is that even going to work? And for some of us who are actually still using check payments, and how does one even do the signatories, physical signatories, using courier, and making sure that we, as we work from home, we have a framework around fraud management, cybersecurity, what we call hygiene, and basic practice. So this is another topic for another webinar. If you're interested, please feedback. We can organize another webinar on that. We have been helping clients to actually go through all these fundamental framework, intellectual, I won't use the word intellectual, but very operational day-to-day things of having a secure environment working from home. So that's a hot topic for us where we are in Singapore: liquidity, cybersecurity. The question has been asked around, okay, what do we think people will do post-COVID? I'm not sure what post-COVID really means, and whether COVID-19 will be like an event that will suddenly end. But I know that in Singapore, we're trying to live with COVID. Okay, recognizing that the virus will not go away; it will continue to evolve, and as we get immunization, to what extent should we all come back to the office? How do we coexist with the virus and trying to make things work? And that's how our hypothesis is, that it's going to be a living with COVID going forward. Then the question becomes, okay, what does it mean in the new world? I think a lot of conversation is around how do I now transform my treasury function, right? I talked about treasury function, managing bank relationship, managing cash liquidity, managing foreign exchange. And to a certain extent, a lot of companies actually have FX trading, FX hedging type organization. Then the question becomes, okay, as we all come back to the office, how can I do things better? And now that I'm more used to doing things online, digitally, how can I transform my finance and my treasury function? So I think it's going to be a hot topic going forward in the next few months as the conversation moves when countries start to open up. Ivan talks about what is actually really key to the Vietnamese market right now. I would like us to zoom out a little bit. Even before COVID, some of the conversations that we are having with business leaders, what's actually been going around since 2018, 19, 20, and what are the things that companies, especially the multinationals, are actually thinking about. So the first one is about people, right? And you'll notice that as I talk through the next few pages, or even as Francois talks about technology, you'll find that we will keep coming back to people. People is important because as our organization grow and mature, talent is important, right? People with the right competency, people with enough bandwidth to actually perform the roles that we want them to do. So in the same way, as we talk to a lot of multinational companies, the topic is around the evolving role of a treasurer. We are shifting from a treasury professional in charge of payments and receivables and borrowings and lending in excess cash, that traditional role. We were talking about how do we skill up a treasurer to actually be a business trusted advisor to CEO, to business groups, in terms of what are the key able to help the company and to drive growth. So there's been a ongoing conversation that we have with many of our clients, and we ended up doing work like how do we do a treasury vision? Where should your treasury be in 3 years' time? What should be the right organizational structure going to look like, and so on and so forth. So that's one hot topic. And going clockwise, related to that is the maturity of the treasury operation. What we mean by that is for a lot of companies that are local, that's fine because your treasury, your cash operation is actually very local. But as your organization grow and you have different subsidiaries overseas, then how does one manage all the different cash in the different currencies, and how do we organize it better so that you, CFO, CEOs can be comfortable, right, in terms of where you are from a risk standpoint and from a liquidity standpoint. I'll have a few more pages to talk about the maturity of the Treasury operating model. And then the next one is about supply chain. So I haven't talked about supply chain disruption. I'll not talk about it from a Treasury standpoint, right? When I mentioned earlier, COVID-19 drives companies to think about liquidity. And we are seeing companies doing syndicated loans, doing bond issue, drawdown on credit facilities just to make sure that there's cash to manage, the business. The question has always been around, okay, what about my supplier, right? If even though my cash position can be strong, what about my supplier? If my supplier cannot withstand this COVID disruption, then I actually have a supply chain disruption because my supplier may be out of business. And in what way am I able to actually do financing with them? In what way am I able to actually extend their payment terms? And how do we go about a win-win arrangement so that on one hand, my supply chain will not be disrupted. On the other hand, they are feeling secure financially. So that's another topic that that in itself is also another webinar. How do people actually go about doing that? More recent is about global regulatory changes. I'm sure for companies that have borrowings overseas in dollars or in euros and in floating rate basis, you're familiar with the word LIBOR. So the LIBOR migration or the end of LIBOR is actually coming very soon. And the question is around, okay, if I have facilities out there, how am I working with the bank to actually change the pricing index of the financing? And how is that going to impact us financially when we want to refinance? I'll share with you a personal example. Singapore is converting, doing away with SIBOR starting this year over the next 2 years. So a lot of loans are actually being repapered right now. I was talking to my personal banker on my mortgage. My current housing loan is actually in SIBOR, and which at some point is going to go away and re-index to an overnight rate. So we're just talking about pricing. And I realized that should I migrate, my housing loan will be 1% higher. I'm like, whoa, okay. So this is something that for those who have foreign currency borrowing that's indexed to LIBOR, to actually do some calculation and simulation and make some provisions on a possibly increase in interest expense. So I'm going through that right now at a personal level. I can't imagine what you'll be going through. You have that sort of exposure at a corporate level. And global minimum tax is another hot topic. Well, this is recent. We are increasingly seeing countries adopting this global standard. It still has many years to go before it's being formalized. But directionally, what it means may not be impacting Vietnamese company, but surely for the Europeans and the American companies that actually have set up tax efficient tax structure and how that will impact them in a big way. Payment hub is something that Francois and I decided that we should put it here. Even though that in the current Vietnam capital market framework, payments is something that is still to be developed in a more I want to use the word robust, but in a more efficient way, because a lot of what's going on in Vietnam right now is regulatory driven, right? In terms of documentation that requires for signatures and for approvals. We want to leave it here because just to give you a glimpse of what is actually happening in, say, Hong Kong or in Singapore. Because of the open capital market nature of Singapore and Hong Kong, the flow of funds is actually quite seamless and it can be quite quickly. And as a result of that, we are seeing multinationals setting up payment hubs in Singapore, meaning that they set up a Treasury Center, and then the Treasury Center will actually be paying on behalf of all their Asia-Pac subsidiaries or receiving money on behalf of all their Asia-Pac subsidiaries. Some people call it in-house bank, some people call it payment hub, but it is pretty much the same concept. a philosophy and also from a technology standpoint. So if you're interested, we can talk a little bit about that, on how that may be possible for you if you have a treasury operation outside of Vietnam. And the efficiency of doing that is that right now, as a CFO or CEO, you actually have a view of your global cash position. There's one point of contact for you to go to manage all your cash, your FX exposure, and fraud-free, reconciled manner. So this is a vision that I'd like to park with all of you. And lastly, related to that is this whole concept of a digital treasury. Digital is a big word. It means different things to different people. It's all about, in Francois, in my mind, leveraging on technology to actually create better controls, to create more efficiency for our finance operation. And Francois will spend time talking about that. On the last page, I talk about treasury operating model maturity. So this is to give you a little bit more detail in terms of how people actually normally do it. When we start with a finance function, we have an accounts team and doing payments and bank reconciliation. That's almost where everyone starts. And from there, then there's a concept around, okay, how do I actually centralize my bank account? Right? Because if you think about it, if your organization as a whole group, a banking relationship with say 50 banks, and today, say for example, you have 800 bank accounts, and as a company leader, you'll be wondering, how am I going to make sure that the funds are secure, make sure that I actually don't have trapped cash, I actually are able to have access to all the excess cash so that I don't have to borrow. So how do I go about doing it? Or even if you're not on an overseas, what do you call that? You're not multinational at this point, even locally in Vietnam. How many banks, local banks, do you do business with? Do you have bank accounts with? Is there any opportunity to actually centralize that into one or two banks, right? That has a large enough footprint to actually serve you across the whole country. Then in that way, you can control the number of bank accounts. You can actually control the borrowing rates. You can even have a collective bargaining in terms of excess cash investment. So that's the starting point. How to centralize bank relationships and bank accounts. And then once it's successfully done at HQ level, a lot of companies will then say, okay, what about the group? Can I do it for the whole group? So that centrally, the CFO, CEO, I have better control of group cash. And from there comes along, okay, what other things can we do now that we have a group of experts sitting HQ, already establishing a group cash view? And along a group cash view, we end up having a group foreign exchange exposure view, right? And how do we go about managing it more effectively, and so on. And then lastly, number 4 is, again, like I say, the vision that we put forward before you. Payment hub, in-house banking, this is a possibility. But having said that, there are not a whole lot of companies right now, even for MNC, that actually have in-house banking. But those that do have is actually very sophisticated and are certainly driving a lot of efficiency for the company. And then below that, we can talk about having the different value points and value drop for the organization as your treasury function is formalized and is maturing. I'll spend time before handing over to Francois to talk a little bit more about cash management, liquidity management, and also foreign exchange. These are just 2 topics that we can talk about. If you have other comments or other interest topics like around debt equity structure, around bond issuance, we can do it in the separate session, or we can do it offline. But today I want to focus on what I call the 2 basic building blocks for every finance function. So the first one is about cash liquidity. This is important. And the challenge here, which is articulated earlier by me and also by Ivan, is that most CFOs that we work with actually say that they have they have some form of cash forecasting. I remember talking to a CFO in Myanmar to try to introduce him the concept of using a system to actually track his. It's actually a large conglomerate in Myanmar. And I remember the CFO's answer to me was, "Hey Benny, I have 100 people in my finance function. Okay, it may be cheaper, than to actually buy a system and software to use." So I was telling him that that's not the point, right? It's how quickly is 100 people going to produce a cash forecast for you? With a system, you can do it in a minute, right? If we set it up correctly, or even less than a minute. But if I'm going to use manual workforce to do it, assuming that they actually do it correctly, it may take a week to actually consolidate, right? And by the time the cash forecast reach to you, the CFO, you may say, "Oh wow, is it already outdated, right? Because this is so long ago, right? A week ago." And this is a common challenge as we talk to CFOs, right? That there's no visibility to group cash. Even if there is a little bit of visibility, it is usually not timely. And how do we go about doing that? So this is the key to cash and liquidity management is, number one, very fundamentally important to have as accurate as possible and as timely as possible cash forecast for the whole group. And this is something for us to reflect on. And the only way to achieve this is actually by using technology. And again, Francois will talk about that more. And even if there is such a concept in your organization on cash forecast, if you talk to different people in your organization in terms of what's actually important for the cash forecast, you also get different answers, right? For CEO, CFO, you're interested in the overall firm group cash liquidity position. You're interested in cash that's maybe 2 years out, whether you need to raise debt, do syndicated loan, issue bonds, or even go raise fund via the equity market if you want to do an M&A, for example. So as senior members of the company, I'll be looking at the strategic cash type of conversation around how do I go about doing M&A? If I want to do a capital expenditure, a huge one, do I have enough cash? So the mindset and the horizon on cash forecast is around maybe 1 year, 2 years, or for some even 3 years, right? So that you can manage the rating agencies, you can manage the capital markets. Then on the extreme right, for some companies that have a centralized payment shared services center, this is actually an MNC concept, which I hope at some point the Vietnamese company will adopt this as well. So what MNC does is they tend to warehouse all what we call the administrative part of the operation into a shared service. So that shared service, the word shared is supporting the whole group, right? That is to create efficiency. So for shared services center, their cash forecast to them is 3-day cash, right? For me to really make payments, do we need to draw short-term overnight lines? Do we have a view as to really I have enough cash to make all these supplier invoices payment? And then somewhere in the middle, we have the corporate treasury, right? That actually sits in between, that sees the whole view. So corporate treasury's view on cash forecast is short-term. Do I have enough cash to make payments? All the way to long-term, right? Do we have enough cash to do M&A or to do capital expansion? And this is where our appeal to you is to consider having a centralized group of people that is focused in helping the whole organization to have one view of cash. Because regardless of how you look at cash, the data is the same. Now, can you imagine if the data is from different sources? Organization will find it very challenging to actually have to reconcile. And so this is where Treasury can sit to create value for you from a timeliness of report, accuracy of report standpoint. What are the best practices out there that we see? The best practice in having a very robust cash forecast practice is actually based on 3 things. I keep coming back to people. By having the right people with the competency, the expertise is important. And traditionally, these are finance staff and which is good, because I think finance staff are able to be sensitized to balance sheet items. So have a finance team dedicated to do cash forecasting is important. And more importantly is the process, right? How quickly, how often do you get the forecast from the subsidiaries, and which day do you actually do the consolidation? And at what point do you report to the CFO? And at what point do you reconcile a missed forecast? So the process is actually important, and there are methodologies for doing that very efficiently. And again, coming back to system, we have good people, we have good process. We also must have the right tool, and tools are actually very readily available. Excel, as a finance person, I grew up with Excel, and we're all familiar with how to navigate using Excel spreadsheet. The limitation of Excel is error, right? Human error, traceability of error, accountability of error. So this, and to consolidate multiple Excel spreadsheets also takes time. And once you have a formula error, it will take hours to unravel. So that's probably the limitation of Excel. But today, as we speak, there are a lot of solutions that are actually very, I will use the word cheap, out there, very accessible for a company to do very fundamental and effective cash flow forecasting. In the interest of time, I'll also quickly go through foreign exchange. I'm not sure how this topic is, how important this topic is to you, but we know that some of the Vietnamese companies, CFO that we speak with, this is actually very top of mind, particularly those who have business overseas and having to deal with fluctuation of currencies in some emerging markets overseas, or even if I have liabilities in euros or in US dollars, the strengthening of US dollar against, say, Vietnamese dong is also a top of mind for a lot of business leaders. So how do we go about managing foreign exchange exposure? This is the framework that we use, the approach that we use as we work with clients to try to answer this question. And usually it's again this 8 steps that we go through with the client in a very systematic way. First is let's talk about what policy do you have today, right? And along with your policy is about who is actually doing it and what SOP do you have. So once we baseline that, and then if you have a policy, good, then we can see how if there any policy gap. If you don't have a policy, which is also fine, then we'll work with you in terms of trying to identify the exposures. What exposure do I care about? And the interesting thing is this. Being a consultant now for 7 years and now having worked with multiple clients on policy work, I can say that all the policies that we work on, even though it's on the same subject, it's actually all different. And it is all different because we're all in different industry, number one. And not only are we in different industry, we are also in different level of maturity. And so there is a calibration around the sector that we are operating in, because that will drive a different conversation around the whole value chain, the exposure of foreign exchange as a result of that. Some companies borrow overseas, some companies don't. So the policy that we see, having worked with so many companies right now, is actually very different. So we end up spending a lot of time talking to CFOs around what's actually important for you. What exposure are we trying to manage, and what keeps you awake, right? And then we will try to measure up, okay, how big of a deal this is, how material this is, and what sort of risk are you actually taking? Are you okay with that, or are you not okay with that, right? And even for some companies, we actually even talk to the board, right? The AC chair or the board risk committee, that's one, right? In terms of how, from an enterprise standpoint, can I accept this risk, and how do I deal with it if I cannot accept this risk? And then we formulate a hedging strategy, something very simple, something very operatable for the Treasury team to actually work on. And then we build a execution, right, management team process to actually manage it systematically. I have a page later on to talk about what does it mean to do it systematically. And then obviously, as we have all things with finance people, right, we monitor performance, we do simulation, we do reporting. And also not forgetting, when we talk about Treasury, financial product, hedging, risk management, it is very important that we actually work alongside the accounting team, because for some companies, in different countries, the accounting standard actually allow for certain hedge accounting treatment to certain financial hedges that the company buys. So how do we go about making sure that the hedges are treated in the right way? So again, this is working very closely with the accounting team. And then this is a circular loop, and then we're constantly having to access the plan, to revise our policy. So to us, this is an ecosystem of how CFOs, companies, treasury team can actually think about managing your foreign exchange risk. Systematic hedging program is important because one of the phenomena that we observe all the time is that when there's a market crisis, the CFO will ask the treasury team, or the board will ask the CFO, why are you not hedging? Why are you not buying US dollars to protect the exposure, right? And then you'll come a chain reaction on, oh, wow, we have to hedge. 6 months later, when the crisis and the volatility is over, the CFO or the treasury leader will get asked, right, why are you actually doing this hedge? The market is actually quite calm now, right? We're now having loss because of the hedge. So the conversation around how can we do it systematically, so that whether is there a crisis, no crisis, we're actually tackling this set of risk management in a very systematic way, and everybody's clear how we're doing it. So namely, these are the few things, right? What exposure are we trying to manage? What financial instruments are we using? What are we allowed to use? When do we actually hedge? Do we hedge when market is actually very volatile? Or do we hedge systematically every month or every quarter? And how long do I buy the financial hedge for, right? If to the extent that it's allowed, right, by the regulators. And how much do I even hedge? And who do I do the hedge with, right? So these are the 6 questions to answer to build a systematic hedging program. And again, zooming out, we talk about the building blocks. If I were to organize the treasury team today, in terms of how we're going to build this, we'll organize, again, the people part, make sure that we have the right talent, the right competency to actually talk to bankers, right? Because we have to make sure that the bankers deal with us fairly, and to have comfort in terms of how that relationship is going. Let's hire expertise, right, in our organization to lead this process. And then we talk about who do we want to do business with. It's the same thing, right? For cash management, liquidity management. For FX is who do I want to enter into FX instrument with, and because some hedges can be expensive, right? How do I actually get the best price? How do I work with a counterparty whom I trust, whom I believe will be fair with me, right? And then this was the previous page, right? Let's adopt a systematic hedging program, and then system, right? Francois will spend time talking about that. Moving away from Excel to actually using tools that are actually readily available to actually monitor the hedging, monitor the cash flow, and give you business leaders a dashboard, right, for real-time reporting. And then lastly, I talk a little bit about cross-functional working with tax and with accounting. So these are the important ingredients should you think about strengthening your treasury organization. With that, I'll pass the time to Francois to talk about technology before we come back for a Q&A session and wrap up thereafter. Thank you.
Thanks, Benny. Sau đây chúng ta sẽ có một cái câu hỏi nhỏ trên cái cơ sở các cái chia sẻ của Benny vừa rồi. Thì các anh chị có thể nhìn thấy câu hỏi ở trên màn hình hiện tại và vui lòng click những cái câu trả lời mà nó phù hợp. Lưu ý là mình có thể chọn nhiều câu trả lời cùng lúc. Câu hỏi này phần lớn xoay quanh cái chức năng nguồn vốn nào dưới đây đang được thực hiện ở công ty các anh chị. Có thể là mình đang thực hiện chức năng quản lý thanh khoản, quản lý các ngân hàng đối tác, quản lý tiền dư và đầu tư, hoặc là mình tham gia vào chiến lược tài trợ nguồn vốn.
Based on Mr. Benny's sharing so far, I would like to have another poll regarding the current treasury function at your company. The poll is now appearing on the screen. Please note that you can choose more than one answer.
Mình cũng tương tự, mình cũng sẽ để một vài phút để các anh chị tham gia vào cái poll này. Ban tổ chức xem mình có thể có kết quả. Xin mời kết quả từ ban tổ chức ạ. Okay. I think tôi nghĩ là cái câu trả lời nó cũng tương đối giống với những cái kỳ vọng của ban tổ chức.
I think that the answer is pretty much what we expected, and in terms of the treasury functions. These are the main functions that most of the companies. We see that from 62% to 87% would focus on managed bank relations and liquidity management. Thank you very much for joining.
Trong công tác quản trị nguồn vốn, ông François đã tham dự rất là nhiều dự án triển khai và chuyển đổi công tác nguồn vốn cho các công ty ở tại Singapore và công ty đa quốc gia khác trong khu vực quy mô lớn trong khu vực châu Á, và làm việc với các đối tác cung cấp dữ liệu trên các nền tảng như là Swift, công nghệ của ERP và các cái nền tảng dữ liệu khác trên thị trường. Thì sau đây tôi xin giới thiệu ông François.
For now, we would like to invite Mr. François to present on the technology in treasury management.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be with you in this webinar today. And I'd like to share some highlights for you on treasury technology and so on. So what we address mainly the treasury structure, the cash flow management and foreign exchange. Technology solution will be required all along the transformation journey. And some companies may choose to streamline the structure first and define a blueprint before adopting technology, while some other may choose to implement technology solution first. And this is much easier to visualize and bring results faster in terms of treasury objective. And systems are a very concrete way to set quick wins. We've seen and we've worked with many companies that may choose a direction rather than the others. And I remember clearly going to a customer, let's say Malaysia, and what the treasurer says is like the vision that my CFO put for the treasury is really to have this big flat TV screen on his office and be able to see what is all the information of his treasury. And this vision, I can say it's not an utopia, it is the reality now. You can see this consolidated and aggregated data, and you can even go further by having the mobility and the touchscreen impact by putting these visualizations across your company. So treasury system and supporting technology are actually an enabler of your overall treasury transformation. And you, as a decision maker, should be in a position to access all treasury data. Cash management, risk, as shown into those dashboards. As well, you can filter the data and run simulation. And all the data handling is actually automated or handled by the treasury team. And those actually represent dashboards that our Deloitte team has developed for a customer underlying treasury management system to record and capture the data. They represent what your organization should aim for in terms of treasury reporting and oversight of the treasury functions. And typically the dashboard, what they can show how much cash do I have across my different business units, across my different banks, across my different geographies. How much cash do I have over the near or medium terms, and what are my forecasted cash flows? How much can I fund my balances? How much cash do I need? How much can I invest? And for which period of time? How much do I have control over my risk when I look at two different counterparties? And how can I hedge according to my treasury policies? And also, what could be the benchmark rate I'm looking in if I take my total cost of funds, including fixed or floating rates? So treasury management system, if we summarize, it can help you to address three key activities. One is related to consolidated cash management. You have direct connectivity with banks. You include your cash forecast, and you can support the evolution of your treasury by being the in-house bank for the group and centralize further activities. The second point is to handle all your financial transactions and cover activities such as loan, investments, FX, and all the related cash flows, and downstream activities such as payments, accounting, that all those financial transactions cover. And as a third point, it gives you a good structure for governance as a single truth of data for all the information by giving you more controls, fraud preventions, and also more data, verifiable data, following the process workflow for treasury leading practices. So this is, in a way, quite static view of the reporting, but more than happy to have further discussion with you to show you how those dashboards can be interactive and how can we show you as well leading example, leading practice in terms of treasury reporting, because it will give you an access to information that you didn't even think you would have as per your treasury department. And one of the benefits of the treasury system is actually to redeploy resources smartly and more efficiently. And traditionally, a lot of companies spend most of the time on treasury operations looking at the past or present data, consolidating information, doing reconciliation, and ensuring that transactions are completed before the cutoff time. And that takes most of the days for companies. And actually, the true potential of treasury is actually to be more forward-looking, assessing the future cash flows and what is their impact on cash balance, what are the key risks for treasury, which are mainly liquidity, currency risk, interest rate risk, and counterparty risk. And while growing the size of the company and the treasury team can be an easy solution, you need to think about the personal career developments of the team that needs to be closely considered. So the question to ask yourself is actually, can some of those redundant activity for treasury operations can be automated, allowing individuals to add more value in analytical or strategic activities? And the reallocation of the time of effort for your treasury team will give them more exposure to deal and to negotiate with banking partners, optimizing the cost of funds, looking for higher returns on cash investments. And for companies who have set an ambitious treasury vision, a treasurer can be a key stakeholder for merger and acquisition decisions and capital structure, while most of the business as usual activities are simplified and automated through technology. So what are the technology options for the company? And I know that there were some questions about what are the solutions, the system in place there. I mean, there are many solutions that are there, and it depends on the size and the complexity of your organizations. as we mentioned before, a number of companies rely still very much on spreadsheets to consolidate that data. And if you are dealing mainly with one banking partner, you may well do your treasury activities by logging on to your e-banking portal. There are some discrepancies into the market with different corporate banking portals, but if you look at it, you could have incomplete information because it doesn't include the other banks and it doesn't include cash flow related to business operations and integrations with other systems. So it makes sense as well to look into ERP solutions. So typically the large ERP systems such as Oracle, SAP, have treasury modules to report on cash management and handle financial transactions. They have a key advantage of being fully integrated with the rest of the finance, but they require a longer process transformations, a longer implementation period, which translates as well in higher costs. In many cases, this is a decision driven by IT to simplify and rationalize the number of systems used by the company. And then a third alternative is to look at specialized treasury management system, and those tend to be nowadays cloud-based software as a service solutions with little or no customization. And looking at this is part of the whole IT strategy and policy, but they usually gain favor or preference from the treasury team. So there are a few that are specialized into this market in Asia and Southeast Asia that we can actually show you some of their screens, their systems. We have demonstration systems. I can link you up with some of the vendors to help you into the selections or the assessment of this solution. If we look at our treasury survey, most of the companies that are operating the treasury would have adopted a treasury management system. But the trend is still pretty much to rely on spreadsheets. If we're looking at cash management, financial transactions, liquidity, those are aspects that treasury system can work on. And I think COVID has been really a catalyst for companies to look into more technology and solutions. And we've seen more and more companies looking to implement a treasury system as a response to the pandemic and address the gaps that they identified during their business continuity planning that they activated last year. In terms of factors or challenges, well, there's a cost component to this, but there's also returns that can translate into better saving, more efficient working capital, better prevention of risk and controls, and you can get higher returns on consolidated rates brought by treasury centralization. And so we know a few treasury management system vendors that are actually looking actively into the Vietnam treasury market as corporates increase their regional exposure and they need to cope with the strong growth. Banks have already gone through that modernizations over the last 5-10 years by going through implementing, deploying treasury management systems to handle the banking treasury. And it's only normal and it's really the right time now for corporates to take a closer look at those treasury and cash management systems. I also wanted to highlight on some points related to payments processing. We talked about payment hubs and optimizations. And for the company we work with, we currently see much more integrations between the payment functions and the treasury function. And it's been true, especially for companies in emerging countries, that there is a thin separation between payments and treasury. And payments are usually a very manual task where controls are necessary, but can be simplified. We see companies moving traditionally from a paper-based payment method through electronic payments method using standard payment format like ISO XML and using connectivity channel like Swift, host-to-host, or API. that creates a substantial change for company in terms of reviewing the process, and a strong change management is actually required to transform the payment functions. So in this flow, you can see that typically payments are initiated after the payment run. They can go into the payment hubs where all the approval can be centralized, fully secure, and could be done through mobile. And once this is done, this is actually directly transmitted to the bank on a pre-authorized method and does not require a further validation. And after, you get acknowledgement saying that the payment has been successfully executed and updating the status of the payment, simplifying the overall reconciliation process. So having multiple sources of payment flows and multiple banking partners, and everything can be centralized through the payment hubs by giving you integrated connectivity with the banks to have the formats available for each bank in each country, by putting in place strong controls and replicating the approval matrix through the system, and adding as well security through machine learning and fraud detections, would actually play or try to mitigate the strategy that you have across cybersecurity. And looking at the future of treasury, technology, leadership, and talent, there are many more coming innovations that can really change fundamentally how companies operate their treasury in the next 5 to 10 years. And companies in Asia tend to leapfrog directly to the newest available technology, which is the best in class, which is proven, rather than really going through outdated technology, multiple upgrades, iterations, and so on. And while we've seen that core treasury system provides the foundations, there will be much more collaboration, access through mobile data, and dematerializations of the treasury function. So it will give companies much more flexibility in making decisions, in exchanging data inside or outside of the organizations, and providing more and more insights to the overall finance function. So some of the key features that we see developing into the roadmap are really more into the advanced analytics. So the dashboard that I've seen will keep on improving, being standardized, and giving the treasury much more power into the decision making. There will be much more automations that go beyond just the core treasury, but including systems like email processing, adding on to reconciliation. And the possibilities for automation are really endless. And one thing that we're also closely looking at is the blockchain and decentralized finance, by generating smart contracts, removing confirmation letters, where all the database is decentralized through a decentralized ledger. So as a conclusion, watch carefully this space as a number of innovations are coming up. Definitely happy to share more about technology innovations, share more about what treasury management system can do. This is a very interesting space, and we see treasury will contribute further in finance automation. So with this, I'll hand it over to the team, and we can go into a Q&A and summary.
Thank you, François. Thank you very much. Xin cảm ơn phần trình bày của tất cả các diễn giả, và chúng tôi hy vọng là các diễn giả đã chia sẻ những cái thông tin rất là hữu ích cho quý doanh nghiệp. Và bây giờ chúng tôi xin phép mời các anh chị chuyển qua phần hỏi đáp ạ. Thì hiện tại chúng tôi đang có ở đây là các cái một số các câu hỏi. Tôi xin dành câu hỏi đầu tiên cho ông Benny là
for the Q&A
giám đốc tài chính
section,
thường sẽ yêu cầu gì từ bộ phận quản lý nguồn vốn ạ?
To invite Mr. Benny for the first question.
Sorry, I'm trying to make sure that I got the correct question.
So the first question is, what does the CFO typically require from Treasury?
It's actually a very interesting question. whoever is asking that question is actually thinking a lot more, right, in terms of organizational capabilities. It used to be, I would say, 20 years ago or 10 years ago, the CFO requirement of Treasury to make sure that there's enough cash, there's no payment fraud, right, and make sure that all the bank account is actually reconciled. So that was the expectation, I would say, years back. Right now, with COVID is only recent. But even before COVID, we actually were trying to actually help companies answer that question. And CFO are increasingly seeing the importance of a professional, a treasury professional as a strategic advisor to the CFO, right? In terms of answering questions around market trends, fundraising possibilities, or even strategy, right, to reduce expense financing costs, and how to advise a business, right, on supplier management, or even on M&A. So we are seeing these roles actually being a lot more strategic now, and even more so now COVID or for Vietnamese companies, right, going out COVID and rethinking the role of a treasury function. That role has certainly changed from being more operational, to being more strategic.
Thank you, Benny. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Thank you. Chúng ta có cái câu hỏi thứ hai đến từ các anh chị tham dự của webinar hôm nay, là làm thế nào để mình có thể xác định xem là cái mô hình hoạt động hiện tại của quản lý nguồn vốn có đủ khả năng để phục hồi sau khủng hoảng hay không. Benny, do you see the question?
The second question would be how to make sure that the operating models of treasury management would have the capability to recover post a crisis.
I think this is not an easy question to answer. Very simply because every company is different, and every expectation is different, and functionally the things that there's to be performed by the finance team is actually also very different. I keep coming back to people. If anything, that's important is to make sure that we have the right expertise to be able to help you, the CFO, build a treasury function, and to alongside someone that also understands technology. Because sometimes when we talk about technology, it can be so daunting, right? It's like a black box. Wow, it's going to be expensive. It's going to take a long time to implement. It's going to be very tedious. But someone who with expertise of doing treasury system will be able to quickly actually help facilitate, right? That sort of conversation. I mean, a typical technology implementation in the most basic form, which Francois mentioned, right, takes about 6 months. Nothing more complex. And if anything that's more complicated, maybe 9 months. So we're talking about the speed today of actually doing technology implementation, for example, right? So someone with expertise on market risk, on financing, able to talk to bankers and understand what the banker is trying to say, right? And also be able to talk technology, right? So I think these are the core skill set that's important.
Thanks, Benny. Nói chuyện về công nghệ thì chắc là tôi cũng xin có một cái câu hỏi nhanh dành cho ông Francois. Hiện tại đây có một cái câu hỏi liên quan đến là ngân sách thông thường cần đầu tư cho một hệ thống quản lý nguồn vốn là bao nhiêu? Francois, can you take it?
I would like to send this question for Francois. What is the budget, the average budget for the technology in treasury management?
Yeah, so I think Benny answered this question partially. So, I mean, yeah, typically the project for the implementations, you can get a system up running on 6 months. What we see as well is there's no point really going through a full big bang approach. And there are some modules or functions of a treasury management system that you can get up running quite quickly. So there are cases like you need to have like a cash visibility and access your banking. So just putting in place the connectivity and seeing your bank reports, which actually can come quite fast within 2 to 3 months. That can be done as long as your banks are onboarded. And this is really very good for the traction of the projects to show results, and that the whole team is confident that this is the right way to go, and to get the overall management support. So in this kind of project, it's really a joint effort by working with you, and that's really coordinating all the teams in place internally or externally, like talking with the bankers and so on.
Thank you. Thanks, François. Do thời gian của mình có hạn nên chắc là tôi xin chuyển câu hỏi cuối cùng cho ông Penny.
Due to limited of time, we would like to send this question to
các công ty FDI
Penny.
trong việc áp dụng lãi suất LIBOR trong điều kiện COVID là như thế nào?
What is the pros and cons for FDI using a LIBOR interest rate in COVID-19?
I think LIBOR or bank funding costs has nothing to do with COVID, right? I don't think that banking structure or pricing mechanism changed during COVID. So from a context of COVID standpoint, there is no pros and cons from that perspective. But I understand that since the concept of LIBOR is going away, and in Vietnam, specific to Vietnam market, usually most of the loans are priced on average cost of fund, right, from the banks. And this is the practice, and it's actually not bad practice. It's actually a good practice. So continue to have that practice for as long as companies who are actually borrowing are able to get very clear benchmarks, right, of funding costs, and then to price the loan. The more important question is for companies. I'll answer the FDI part first. The more important question for the audience here today for companies is, if you look at the bank deposit rate, right, it's actually the lowest in 10 years, right, I think. And right now, interest rate is actually very low. And as a result of that, all the financing interest expense that you're experiencing right now is actually very good. But as we look back historically, deposit rate was at one point as high as 10%, right? So the question becomes, as company leaders, as CFOs, how do I do simulation around and prepare for it, right? Should the day come where interest rate goes up? So I think that one is to me a more important question for companies. For FDIs, I think a specific bank itself will probably not be able to change the practice. So this is a practice, and it's one of those. If you're from a bank and you're trying to help client, then the question is around how you're able to help client manage your interest rate risk, right? There are some financing arrangement where if I borrow for 3 years, the first year is actually on a fixed rate that's agreed, and then year 2 and year 3 is actually based on the average deposit rate or average bank funding cost. Then how from a bank standpoint can you help your corporate client, right, to actually stagger the loan strategy, so that there's actually a lot more fixed component to it, right, to actually manage the rising interest rate costs. So again, this is another topic for a long discussion. If you are interested to talk more, I mean, I'm surely available to talk about that. Thank you.
Cảm ơn, thanks Penny. Bởi vì thời lượng của chương trình cũng có hạn nên Deloitte sẽ xin phép được khép lại cái phần thảo luận tại đây.
Due to limited of time, we would like to end the Q&A section as of now.
Đối với những câu hỏi mà chúng tôi chưa kịp giải đáp thì ban tổ chức và các diễn giả cũng sẽ xin phép được phản hồi lại với các quý vị sau. Và nếu mà anh chị cũng muốn có một cái buổi trao đổi riêng với các chuyên gia của Deloitte thì
and thank you participants for your question, and we apologize for not being able to answer all the questions. For more information, please contact our team for support, or if you would like to discuss in private with our specialist, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Before closing the seminar, we would like to leave you 6 questions to self-reflect the treasury practice at your company and develop a suitable roadmap for you.
là cái hoạt động quản trị nguồn vốn thành công. Thứ hai là trong vòng 12 tháng tới thì cái ưu tiên hàng đầu, hoặc là 3 ưu tiên hàng đầu, hoặc là 5 ưu tiên hàng đầu của bộ phận quản trị nguồn vốn là như thế nào. Rồi đối với các anh chị là management, các anh chị là cấp quản lý thì mình đang ưu tiên, hoặc là mình đang có nhu cầu mong muốn nhận được những cái thông tin gì hoặc các cái báo cáo gì từ bộ phận quản trị nguồn vốn. Đối với các anh chị làm quản trị nguồn vốn thì thách thức của mình ở đâu, hoặc là thách thức của doanh nghiệp ở đâu mà cái bộ phận nguồn vốn sẽ phải đối mặt ở trong tương lai gần hoặc là trong tương lai long term hơn, và sự phối hợp giữa bộ phận quản trị nguồn vốn và các bộ phận khác như thế nào để hoạt động của mình có thể hiệu quả và các báo cáo có thể kịp thời nhất. Và cuối cùng cái câu hỏi thứ 6 là doanh nghiệp mình sẽ willing, sẽ chấp nhận để đầu tư bao nhiêu để mình phát triển bộ phận nguồn vốn để thực sự trở thành một cái bộ phận mà nó có đóng góp và giá trị cho doanh nghiệp. Để tổng kết thì tất cả các diễn giả đã chia sẻ hiện trạng và kỳ vọng.
So to sum up, our speakers have shared the Treasury today and the expectation for Treasury. Though the expectations continue to evolve, core challenges remain. Digital transformation is shifting talent demographics, and work events are disrupting Treasury will likely to reshape the function as we know today. Once again, thank you very much for joining the webinar Creating Value with Robust Corporate Treasury. We look forward to receiving you at Deloitte's upcoming events. In August, Deloitte will organize other seminars on topics that many companies are interested in. Please contact us by the email showing in the screen and join us.
Thank you, Benny. Thanks, thanks, Ivan.
Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello.